Welcome to another episode of War Hero to Superhero, helping military, veterans, and first responders transform their lives from the bedroom to the boardroom. I am Daniel Faust, and you're in our virtual boardroom. This month's theme is vision and vision for the boardroom. And our topic today is, did you check the weather? Well, right now I'm living in Delaware. Before I lived in Arizona, and I really didn't have to check the weather at all. I was pretty much all set, but in Delaware, weather can change at random. It has a 49% chance of rain throughout the entire year and snow. Some days you wake up and it could be really cloudy and it not rain a drop. And other times it can be super sunny in the morning and then clouds can envelop and things can go over and happen and storms go over and come. I love to go over and ride on my electric scooter. And today was one of those days that I thought was going to be a good day. So I rode my scooter to work. I had my fun. Luckily, no one hit me today. Sometimes I don't think people watch for people. And I went through the entire day. I went to lunch. I came back. I had my scooter charged. I'm like, I'm not having a power issue, so I should be good to go. Some days I do, some days I don't, because I get caught up in the job. So I left work, and what happens? I walk out the door. I'm like, rain. Rain just hit, and it does not feel good. When you get into your car and you get a little bit of wet, it's fine. But when you're on an electric scooter, which is semi-shielded waterproof, but not totally, but my body was not. I was not prepared. I was in uniform with my helmet, and as I'm riding, I'm worried about falling off my scooter. I'm worried about going over and the brakes not working. I'm worried about other people not seeing me. I did put my lights on. I have a lighted board. I have a light that's on there. I'm wearing reflective gear. I should be seen. And man, I should have went over, and I said this at the gate, I should have checked the weather. And the same thing happened with the guards. Like, I should have checked the weather too. But she's standing at the gate under an awning. I'm riding out in my scooter back to my house. I'm very much glad I live close by. But again, I should have checked the weather. But do you do that for your vision, for your boardroom? No matter if it's you working in the corporate sector, you going over being in that military boardroom and wanting to get to those 20 years, that veteran that's in that GS job, or a civilian that's coming to GS world, or even as a first responder. And even as you're making your transformation from war hero to superhero, you might be looking at and being a vetpreneur to go over and to grow a business. You might be going over and doing something that's amazing. You might be going over and going to college. You might be going over and looking at retirement. No matter what it is, your boardroom's going to constantly change. No matter if you're 25 and just starting out, or you're 65, 75 and going over and ending. We always have some type of boardroom we're going to be entering, in a sense. Some are going to be more active. Some are going to be more passive. So I want to go over and share my story. So when I was in my military boardroom, I really wasn't checking the weather for myself in this next stage in the game. I went over and active duty basically said, hey, you're not congruent with working in this career field. We need to release you from active duty. I went over and looked at the weather in Arkansas in a sense of the situation, and I way over planned and didn't prepare. I mean, I just went on thoughts looking at just the forecast of that day. I'm like, I will have a separation. I can get my TSP. There's 3,000 churches out there. I'm going to be successful. I'm going to go over and thrive. I got out, thought to myself 6 weeks prior, and have 6 weeks of vacation, plus the TSP and everything else. And I thought my financial and overall forecast was going to look well. I'm thinking I have 3 to 5 months of revenue. I should be able to start profiting, at least by a certain point. If I'm aggressive and I'm working 8, 10, 12 hours a day like I do in the military, I'm going to go over and be successful. That was further from the truth. I hit the ground running. I spent a lot of money in places that I shouldn't have. I thought they would be good venues, especially in the social media world, spending some places up to $500 a month, expecting ROI rather quickly. I went over and pursued churches. There was 3,000 churches in 30 square miles. I'm thinking to myself, if I even hit 1%, which is 30, I would go over and thrive. That did not happen. I hit 250 churches in roughly a 60-day period, got no one to turn around for business. It was either no or later. And it was a lot of no and a lot of later. I couldn't go hold on anymore while I was going over and doing that. I got down to 6 weeks of revenue and almost went homeless. Got down to $300 in my checking account, accessing lots of resources throughout the stage, which a bunch of them said, here's the bare minimal, $25, $50, $75, and I'm needing way more than that. I'm down to $300, about to go cry in my face, in my chair, asking for God for some type of relief. I did get that relief, but that's not common, especially in the veteran space when we get almost near homelessness. I got providential, I got my disability, and then I went over and went from there and then got a job. But the dream of that vision, gone in an instant, and everything else. It has taken me now 70 jobs, 7 years, and a lot of work to go over and get there. And I want to show you what we could have learned and what I learned in this particular regard from this to basically now take the concept of weather and bring it to your vision, because this is very much important to have you thrive in your life. So what could we learn from my mistakes? I was 30 years old, 32 years old, got out of the military. I'm now 38. Yeah, so 12 years now. I was at 30 and now I'm 38, almost 39. And what did I learn from that 2012 to 2013 and also through all the 70 jobs that I've been through? Because I tried again and had debacles in one way or another. So what have I learned from these 7 years, 70 jobs, thousands of interviews, and the times of when I was running my business full time and then almost collapsing? Here's a couple things. Number one, the financial forecast. I financially forecast myself when I got out of the service. My TSP gave me roughly about $6,000. My bonus gave me 16. I mathematically calculated in about 4 to 6 months with disability and other things that came in, I should go over and be fine. No, that didn't go over and happen. I financially did not forecast long enough in there. Dave Ramsey and a lot of financial people go over and say, when a normal person loses a job, they need to have 6 to 9 months of revenue. I didn't have 6 to 9 months of revenue. I had between 4 to 6 months of revenue. But then I was running a business, so you need a lot more than that. Usually you want to have a couple years of expenses to go over and run a business. So the first lesson, no matter where you're at, if you're doing this from just a civilian as an employee or as a person as high-end as an investor, you got to have lots of capital to go over and back up those financial woes, because they will happen. So if I had to go do it over again, I would have ran my business as a part-time, worked as going over in Arkansas full-time, and the skills I had, IT, and still using unemployment and other resources I went over and had. I would have scaled down what I did, the things that I did. Like at the time I went over and scaled and we had fleas that hit our entire house, and I spent a couple $1,000s to replace all the things. I could have just took the time to get it out and sanitized and maybe had somebody spend $100 and then gradually replace the kitchen instead of expeditiously. I don't have any of that stuff anymore. It got that bad. That's number one. Number two, the winds of timing. I'm coming in to an environment that I don't understand what I'm walking into, and the timing of connecting with churches and everything else. So I'm coming in May, officially then starting in July, because the first 6 weeks I really didn't ramp up. I'm thinking like, oh, I'll just go over and relax in there. The winds of timing is drastically different, depending especially on what business you're going over. I've learned marriage, family, and leadership when it comes to soft skills businesses, the majority of their money is made is February to October. And I'm starting in July, so I'm 5 months away from the power curve. The reason why is because once the holidays come in, people mentally shut down. And it takes a long time to go over and get a business to go from meeting with them, connecting with them, and then going over and bringing service. Sometimes some of my speaking and teaching engagements have taken months and sometimes even a year to go over and go from start to finish. And I went over in the winds of timing, tried to say, if I'm more aggressive and I hit more things, I'm going to go do that. It can go over and work, but we have to know the winds of timing in certain things. If you're in retail, this is prime target right now for you guys going into September, into October, November, and December. I learned that as I went into the corporate world on what jobs happen. So if I went over and one job ran out of revenue, I was able to then figure out and pivot my job. That's why I had 70 different jobs. I would go from retail to food delivery to going over and selling vacuums. I've done a bunch of things, a lot of IT contracts, even in the world of trying to get hired. People typically don't want to hire after like Thanksgiving. So even for a job, it was a rare gift for me to move down to Delaware to get hired. Even my commander, my supervisor, wanted to hire me. Well, let's wait until after January or February. I'm like, he graciously allowed me to expedite the situation, but it was still a headache. So even in the winds of time, know your season on where you're going. What is your virtual boardroom look like? What it looks like today, and what does it look like tomorrow, and going over and making those decisions. From there, the radar of your spouse and kids. Your boardroom can consistently change in your life. The average person from 18 to 65, pre-COVID, pre-digital world, was 9 times they've changed their jobs. Sometimes it's in the same business, sometimes it's in multiple corporations. And as you climb the corporate ladder, the same thing, just like as an active duty and as a reservist, as a guardsman, you might not be at the same base your entire career at the same job. Same thing in the GS world. You might be stagnant on there. So you definitely got to check the radar of your spouse and your kids. My spouse was only sort of on board. My kids were too young to get a radar of, but the thing is that I had young kids, super young kids. If I go back to 2012, my kids were born between 2007 and 2010, so they're ranging 2 to 5 years old. It's not a good time to go put instability in that particular regard unless you have the financial footprints that we're talking about to go over and deal with those things. So the radar of my spouse and kids was very much important, and I kind of ignored it. I'm going to say blatantly I ignored it. And I thought God was going to go preserve things. Now, you can have a faith and he can do all things, but the thing is sometimes you get the inclination, just like if we know a hurricane or a tornado is coming, there's good wisdom in the radar. Doesn't mean the radar is always right, but the thing is it gives you a potential of what could happen. Is it better to go over and for me today to look at the radar and not ride my scooter and be a little disappointed, or be soaking wet when I got back? Imagine if it was hurricane or a tornado and I was riding through it. That would have been really worse if I avoided the radar. Number 4, the highs and lows of the environment. I knew my environment in the military, in the sense I knew my highs and lows on what was mental health. It wasn't the best decision to go working, but I knew that. When I'm jumping in the highs and lows of working with churches at the time, I didn't understand those highs and lows in that particular regard. I thought to myself, if I continue to press combat boots, khaki pants, button-down shirt, I can go over and change the world in that particular regard. But churches have highs and lows, and so do certain businesses have highs and lows. If you don't understand the highs and lows, just like barometric pressure, the regular person can go over and deal with the barometric pressure. If you have specific issues like my wife does, highs and lows can cause migraines, can take you out. The same thing can happen in the environment of your boardroom. If you don't understand the highs and lows and the off tempos of what it is, and you're just coming and bashing in like I did, some days I would get a yes, some days I would get a no. Sometimes, and I didn't even understand the highs and lows on how those quote unquote boardrooms work. When at least when I was active duty trying this out, I had the protection. So when the highs and lows of churches were refusing or businesses were refusing, I had that buffer so I could handle those highs and lows, and then I could learn those highs and lows at the same time. Also, the pressure of transition. So when there's a lot of pressure outside in weather, what causes happens? Storms. What goes over and happens is, other types of things. So rain comes in, lightning comes in, positive and negatives, pressures and those type of things, and charges and whatnot. I'm not strong on weather, so if you have some better analogies, please share with me. I'd love to go and hear them so I can better serve the community next time. But the pressures of transition was difficult. I went over going from having a lot of people connected, sort of, to basically isolated, alone, and now figure out church, figure out apartment, figure out business, figure out all those types of things. There is not a lot of things going on and set up. When you go to a bare bones base, even though it's hard, it's difficult, and those pressures, or when you're going out into training in that particular guard as a first responder or as a military person, you have those pressures, but you have your backstop. For me, I had those pressures and I had no backstop in that particular guard. So I had to continually deal with the pressures of finances and spouse and kids and transitions and those types of things. And what we really need to do is to transform. But the only way we can transform is to go and prepare. And since I didn't prepare, I ran into all those pressures that came down, and the storm came. And it almost took us out. Literally, one deposit and one phone call in a matter of a couple of days that went over and changed everything. We still went through other stories of these particular things. Fortunately, they weren't as bad as Arkansas, but they have brought a lot of pain in that particular guard. And the vision for me initially got tainted and drawn back. And last, the right season, the right time. I initially went over and connected with a ministry to go over and to interview. They liked me, they liked my wife, but two things they said that was not there. I didn't have 90 families that I could go over and solicit fundraising to come in. They wanted me to raise about $90,000 to $100,000. I thought that's insane. But the thing is that they know how to prepare for the right season, right time. When you have $90,000 to $100,000 as a family doing ministry, you have that money in buffer to handle the good and the bad in the season. And they also said timing. It's like you just got out of the service, you need to go connect with your family. So they gave me the right advice and said it's not the right season, it's not the right time. But I put it against myself to go over. I pushed it onto myself, not pushed it against myself. I pushed it onto myself saying, oh, they're wrong and everything else. I'll go over and maybe work with them as a business compared to as a partner in this particular regard. And I went down to Arkansas anyway, which was totally the wrong season and the wrong timing. I tried to force something that wasn't supposed to be. So I went over and failed. And that failure is still going over and being worked through each and every day. I'm thankful to go over and share this with you so you learn and live. But the thing is that if I could have went back. So you see some of the things that we can learn from my mistakes in that particular guard, and hopefully it helps you. But here's the other question. Just like I mistakenly spelled something wrong. Ha ha! Just love lives. So what happens when you make the wrong decision and the storms come? What does a typical person go over and do? We usually only have 3 responses. So the hurricanes that just recently hit us in Sally or Katrina or any other thing else, like even we had a brief one that kind of hit us and we get some tornadoes. We can have usually you choose a couple things. First off is evacuate and run. We can go over and do that. We can do that in the storm. If we get the national emergency, we drive away, we go somewhere else in that particular regard. Do we evacuate and run from the vision that we had? Did I go over and do that? I'll get to that at the end, what happened. You can go over and stay. You can go over and stay and see what the storm goes over and happens. A lot of people tend to do that, especially because we sometimes as Americans, and we can be stubborn, not trusting the radar, not trusting the people. We think we know it better ourselves than what it is. That especially happens the stronger the vision the person has, and also the more dominant of a personality style, they tend to stay more than anything else. The third one is go over and rebuild. So they weather the storm, they see what happens in the consequences, and then they go over and rebuild. This is what typically happens in weather, and this is what happens when wrong decisions happen in there. So I have to ask the question, how do you know what to choose? How did I know what to go over and choose? And I'm going to tell you what I did at the end. So first off, in this particular regard, when you know the storm is coming or the storm's coming in, is research. In the sense of doing the same thing, is there enough data to go over and to justify to go do one of these things, evacuate, stay, or rebuild? You know, Rhode Islanders, for example, where I'm from, they have you can do enough research that most storms don't go over and hit. They go and they tend to go over research. The closer you are to the storms, the Floridas that are going through right now, the Alabamas, those type of things, definitely watching that radar and going over and researching. Same thing in the vision. Advice. In the weather world, you get advice from meteorologists, you get advice from apps, you get advice from radar, you might get advice from other people that live in that state to go over and tell you what's good and not to do. Sometimes the city, the state, and even the federal will go over and initiate things, and that's their advice. Hey, you need to get out. Hey, it's okay to stay. Hey, we're not going to speak nothing. You go make your decision. And sometimes even your bosses from the boardroom will then go over and give advice. That's the same thing happens in your vision. You should be looking for advice as you're going over and going into this world. And also resources. So for example, if you're in the storm and it's Florida and it's your second house and it's your beach house and you have a home, let's say in Maine, you know, it sucks going over and losing your house and the beach at like beautiful places like Florida, and we have beautiful beaches in Delaware and those types of things. But when you have those additional resources, it doesn't matter. I had a friend that went over and bought a resource in Louisiana years back when Katrina hit. He went over and overinsured it, and then he rebuilt it back up and then sold it, and then he became a multi-millionaire out of it. But he had the resources. It wasn't his sole home. But in the same thing in the storms, if that's your sole home, that's your sole thing that you have, when you have less resources, you want to be constricted on those particular things and be wise. For me, I was spending in the business like I had tons of resources, and I really didn't. I might have had the heart of a millionaire, but I didn't have the resources of a millionaire to go over and spend. So the storms will come. Is your vision prepared for it? So asking yourself these questions. Do you have the research that you went over and did for the vision and industry and what boardroom you want to go over and have? Do you have the proper advice that goes over and helps you make those wise decisions, what to spend, what to not spend, what to do and what to not do, and everything else? And going over and do you go over the resources to weather the storms? Because it's not an if. It's definitely not an if. I don't know what it is in this world nowadays, but we can tend to go over and get caught up in all the things. You know, the golden buzzer on AGT or all the great stories. And even one day, even when I've spoken on stage, people think it's such a transformational story. But the thing is that there was so much more problems in between that it came through all the storms. So is your vision prepared for it? Now, what happened to me after that? I got blessed with the disability. I got the job. And then I still went through 69 other jobs, approximately. I went through looking at over 2 million jobs. I applied for thousands. I've been on hundreds of interviews. And it took me going over and breaking my back to finally go over and get the full clue on how to do it wise. For me personally, I'm doing a lot more research. I'm taking the advice of people. I'm only using resources that I have budgeted to take those calculated risks, and I still make those mistakes. I recently did one with one of the events. I thought it was going to pan out, and I should have had the money. Now I make the decisions. Now is if I don't have the revenue in my primary sources, then I'm not going to stretch myself in that particular regard. So. And I know for the entrepreneur, you're like, that's, maybe not as much, but I'm trying to be a wise entrepreneur and help you guys to be a wise entrepreneur. That's the transformation from war hero to superhero. The war hero can go over and charge out, but you have a lot of backstops in between. When you're transforming to the superhero, you can be alone sometimes. We want to help you in there, not to be alone and to help you be that backstop, but sometimes you're alone. So our superhero challenge for the day is this. What storms has your vision taken? Have you gone almost homeless? Have you gone over and struggled before? Did you have to quit? Did the dream go over and die? Did it have to get rewritten? Did you rewrite the script? How did you weather the storm? Just like my editing. How did you weather the storm? And I'd love to hear, did you rebuild, did you stay, or did you go over and evacuate? I'd love to go hear what you went over and did. I'd love you to hear to share the stories. And no matter if you're sharing it on Facebook, on Twitter, on Twitch, wherever you're at, love to go hear where you're at, the storms. So that is pretty much about it for us. We want to thank you for joining in the vision of the boardroom. If you are going over and struggling, I think I got something. There we go. No, I don't. All right. So if you are struggling within the boardroom, we love to go connect with you. Every single military veteran and first responder gets 20 minutes free. Go over and connect with us on Facebook, connect with us on Twitter, connect with us on YouTube, whatever way you need to connect on the Easy Way wall and even streaming on Roku. If you want to go take it to the next level for as low as $5 a month, you can go to patreon.com/thrive-not-survive to go over and connect with us. So we will see you next Tuesday, going on into our superhero battle room to interview 5 amazing veterans, military and first responders, to go over and hear their transformational stories. So you can go over and glean off them, because when the storms come, not if, we want you there to go over and take that wisdom and learn and live instead of live and learn, because it really hurts. So have a great day, and remember, check the forecast. Thanks.